Timeline: The Fatal Approach, Japan's Deadly Miscalculation. October 14th, 1944, 13:47 hours, 180 miles northwest of Luzon. The kamikaze pilot plunging toward the USS Randolph believed he had accounted for everything: his descent angle, the ship's evasive turns, even the rhythm of American anti-aircraft fire. Every variable, every second, every movement was in his calculations. What he never anticipated was that American shells would now detonate within 70 feet of his aircraft without ever touching it. The Japanese High Command had ignored the intelligence reports describing this impossible American technology, dismissing them as exaggerated propaganda. Now, that fatal decision was about to demand its price. The morning sun stretched long, sharp shadows across the Philippine Sea as Admiral Teo Kurida's Northern Strike Force advanced toward what Japanese intelligence believed would be a crushing, decisive victory. For a year and a half, Imperial Navy pilots had been reporting unbelievable events. American anti-aircraft rounds bursting in flawless proximity to their targets despite no visible impact. Captured shell fragments had been examined by Japanese scientists who confidently rejected the pilots' claims as stress-induced illusions or American psychological warfare meant to weaken morale. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Yamamoto, leading the third wave of kamikaze strikes that October morning, had been briefed strictly according to established ballistic principles. Japanese tactical manuals, updated as recently as September 1944, still asserted that American anti-aircraft shells exploded only on impact or at preset timing intervals. Their attack formations, every angle, every break, every spiral of descent, had been designed entirely around these assumptions. The reality unfolding from the American cruiser formations would crush 3 years of Japanese tactical doctrine in less than 3 minutes. What the Japanese High Command had never understood was that American scientists had cracked one of warfare's most complicated riddles: how to make an artillery shell think. The proximity fuse, marked VT in classified documents, represented a technological leap the Japanese military believed was physically impossible with 1940s electronics. Hidden inside each 5-inch shell was a compact radar system capable of sensing nearby aircraft and detonating at the perfect moment. This wasn't theory or experimental engineering. By October 1944, American factories were manufacturing these proximity fuses at a staggering rate of 100,000 units per month, each one carrying innovations Japanese researchers wouldn't reach until years after the war ended. Admiral Kurida's attack plan, designed by the Imperial Navy's most seasoned strategists, had accounted for every predictable variable except the one that mattered most. Japanese pilots had been trained to exploit gaps in defensive fire, to maneuver around the predictable timing of conventional fuses. Their formations, their dives, angles, breaks, and coordinated spirals were all built on these long-trusted assumptions. But the reality emerging from the American ships would dismantle those assumptions in under 3 minutes. The fatal underestimation was about to extract its price in a way that would reshape naval warfare forever. By late 1944, the strategic situation for American naval forces had turned increasingly perilous. Japanese kamikaze tactics, first systematically used during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, had achieved devastating levels of success against U.S. ships. Traditional anti-aircraft defenses, built for stopping conventional bombing runs, were nearly useless against pilots ready to die just to guarantee a strike. Statistical reports from Pacific Fleet headquarters revealed the brutal math behind kamikaze warfare. Conventional anti-aircraft guns averaged barely a 3% hit rate against diving aircraft, and even when a shell found its mark, a single projectile rarely carried enough force to stop a pilot intent on completing his final mission. Japanese aviators had mastered the tactic of approaching from multiple directions at once, flooding American defenses with simultaneous threats and overwhelming fire control through sheer volume. Captain Wesley Harrison, commanding the anti-aircraft cruiser USS Oakland, had filed repeated reports highlighting the failure of existing systems. His ship's armament, 16 5-inch guns, cutting edge when installed in 1942, could only track and engage a limited number of attackers at once. Time-fused shells demanded perfect calculations, exact distance, precise elevation, flawless timing. Against several fast-maneuvering aircraft closing in from different angles, those calculations collapsed instantly. The Japanese, meanwhile, had studied American defensive rhythms with near-obsessive precision. The secret American weapon, First Combat Test, Psychological Collapse 1, captured documents recovered from downed reconnaissance planes held detailed evaluations of American gunnery practices. Japanese strategists had exploited a core weakness in traditional artillery. Shells detonated only on impact or at preset times, producing defensive patterns skilled pilots could read, predict, and slip through. Imperial Navy training manuals, refined after 18 months of frontline combat, taught pilots exactly how to defeat American anti-aircraft fire. They learned to strike during the brief seconds when gunners reloaded, to twist and dive in ways that made Americans waste rounds on empty sky, and to coordinate multi-directional attacks that all hit at once. Yet Japanese losses kept rising through 1944. USS St. Lo was sunk by a single kamikaze strike. USS Princeton suffered catastrophic destruction when traditional defenses failed to stop a diving bomber. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz's operational reports showed growing unease among commanders who felt increasingly powerless against tactics that appeared to guarantee successful enemy hits, and the issue went far beyond the survival of individual ships. American amphibious operations depended on steady naval gunfire, but vessels forced to remain on high anti-aircraft alert couldn't deliver consistent support to troops on land. The entire Pacific campaign risked slowing to a crawl as ships diverted manpower and weapons toward defensive systems that simply weren't working. Meanwhile, Japanese intelligence officers had convinced themselves that America had reached the limit of its defensive technology. Submarine reconnaissance and interrogations of captured personnel suggested American gunners were already using their most advanced fire control systems. Japanese scientists, trusting the physical limits of conventional artillery, concluded that meaningful improvement was impossible. That conclusion would become Japan's most devastating intelligence mistake of the entire Pacific War. While Japanese tacticians celebrated what they believed were unstoppable attack strategies, American scientists, working behind sealed doors and absolute secrecy, were developing a weapon that would render every known rule of aerial warfare completely obsolete. The solution already existed inside American research labs, though it was still weeks away from reaching the desperate naval commanders who needed it most. The weapon destined to transform naval warfare had begun as a joint effort between Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Laboratory and the National Defense Research Committee in early 1940. Dr. Merle Tuve, leading the proximity fuse development team, confronted an engineering task that seemed almost unreal: designing a miniature radar device that could survive the brutal acceleration of artillery launch while remaining sensitive enough to detect aircraft at combat distances. Classified Navy Department files detailed just how revolutionary the VT fuse truly was. Each unit, only 5.5 inches long and weighing just 2.1 pounds, carried a full radar transmitter, receiver, antenna assembly, and electronic detonator circuit. Operating at 180 to 200 megahertz, the fuse emitted continuous radio waves and measured their reflections to determine when a target came close. Early testing at the Dahlgren Naval Proving Ground in Virginia pushed the limits of wartime engineering. The fuse's vacuum tubes had to endure more than 20,000 times the force of gravity as the shells fired, an impact that would destroy any ordinary electronics of the era. But American engineers developed shock-resistant components, innovative internal mounting systems, and ruggedized tube designs that could survive the blast. The detection system functioned on Doppler shift principles, analyzing subtle frequency changes in the reflected signal to calculate range and closing speed. And once an aircraft entered the designated kill radius, usually between 50 and 70 feet for a standard 5-inch shell, the fuse fired automatically. The result was a deadly fragmentation burst with a staggering 95% chance of crippling or destroying any aircraft caught in its radius. Production challenges demanded an industrial effort unlike anything attempted before. Eastman Kodak manufactured the fuse casings, Sylvania produced the specialized vacuum tubes, and Western Electric assembled the electronic systems. By October 1944, American factories were turning out proximity fuses even faster than the shells needed to house them, with monthly production climbing into six-figure totals. Bell Telephone Laboratories developed strict quality control procedures, ensuring exceptional reliability. Every fuse went through 17 individual tests before leaving the factory: shock trials, frequency checks, sensitivity calibration, each confirming the device could survive launch and function precisely. Field reliability surpassed 85%, an extraordinary figure for 1944 electronics, meaning fewer than 1 in 6 fuses failed to operate as intended. Even the power supply marked a breakthrough. Each fuse housed a miniaturized battery designed to power the radar system for the few seconds between firing and impact. The battery switched on automatically the moment the shell left the gun, eliminating any need for external connections that might complicate ammunition handling. Security around the technology was absolute. Even shipboard gunnery officers knew only the basics of how to employ the rounds, not how they worked. Shells arrived in sealed containers, and crews were ordered to recover or destroy any unexploded rounds immediately to prevent enemy examination. Japanese military scientists studying fragment samples from failed attacks did notice strange electronic parts, but they misread them as crude guidance components. Their technical analysis insisted that true miniaturized radar was impossible with existing vacuum tube technology and the power demands of the era. This fundamental misunderstanding of American technological capability would become catastrophic the moment proximity fuses entered active combat. October 14, 1944, 1400 hours. The first combat use of proximity fuses began as Admiral William Halsey's Task Force 38 faced the largest coordinated kamikaze assault of the Pacific War. Captain Robert Anders, commanding USS Stockton, received final authorization to use the classified ammunition that had arrived under the strictest security only 3 days earlier. Japanese aircraft advanced in the same formation that had brought devastating success throughout 1944. Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura, leading 120 fighters in a synchronized dive attack, calculated his approach to exploit the reload pauses of American 5-inch guns. His tactics, honed through months of effective kamikaze strikes, relied on the predictable patterns created by conventional time-fused shells. At 14:03 hours, USS Stockton's forward guns opened fire at maximum range. The fire control radar had spotted the incoming planes at 18,000 yards, but the gunnery team waited until they closed to 12,000 yards, standard practice for ensuring effective bursts with traditional ammunition. Then the first proximity-fused round detonated 67 feet from Nakamura's Zero at 14:04:15. The burst, erupting seemingly in empty sky with no direct hit, stunned both the Japanese pilots and the Stockton's gun crews. But within seconds, Nakamura's aircraft broke apart under a storm of high-velocity fragments. The pilot died instantly as shrapnel tore into the cockpit from angles no conventional shell could ever have achieved. Combat action reports from USS Stockton's gunnery department recorded results never before seen. The first salvo of 12 proximity-fused shells destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft, a 33% hit rate, 10 times higher than the theoretical maximum for conventional rounds. Japanese formations, expecting to exploit gaps in defensive fire, instead flew straight into invisible kill zones extending well beyond standard engagement ranges. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific intercepted Japanese pilot communications that revealed complete confusion: shells detonating in midair, no visible targets, aircraft shredded by unseen barriers. Decoded within hours, these transmissions confirmed that the psychological impact of proximity fuses matched and even exceeded their physical devastation. Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, serving as Air Defense Coordinator aboard USS Birmingham, observed the systematic destruction of Japanese attack groups that had tormented American ships for months. His after-action report stated, "Enemy aircraft approached using standard kamikaze tactics. Our proximity fuses created overlapping kill zones that made successful attack impossible. 12 enemy aircraft destroyed, 0 American casualties. The mathematical advantage was staggering. Traditional anti-aircraft fire demanded direct hits or precisely timed bursts. Proximity fuses produced spherical kill zones around each round, increasing the effective target area by hundreds of times. Pilots trained to dodge individual shells could not escape entire volumes of space. By 1430 hours, Admiral Kurita's Northern Strike Force had lost 63 aircraft to proximity fuse fire, with not a single kamikaze reaching its target. Japanese radio transmissions, monitored by American intelligence, revealed mounting panic as surviving pilots reported seemingly supernatural defensive capabilities. The tactical revolution was complete. Proximity fuses had turned anti-aircraft warfare from a contest of precise timing into a method of systematic area denial. Japanese kamikaze tactics, specifically designed to overwhelm conventional defenses, became virtual suicide missions with no chance of success. The psychological impact of proximity fuses surpassed even their physical destruction. Pilots who had faced death countless times in conventional combat now confronted a weapon that killed without warning or explanation. Squadron leader Yoshio Tanaka, one of the few survivors of the October 14th engagement, later testified during post-war interrogations, revealing the total collapse of Japanese tactical confidence. "We approached as we had dozens of times before," Tanaka recounted. "Our formations were perfect, our timing precise. Then aircraft began exploding in empty air. No shells hit them directly. No timing seemed involved. It was as if the sky itself had turned against us." His testimony, confirmed by other survivors, captured the sheer terror inspired by these weapons among pilots previously renowned for their courage. Japanese naval intelligence, receiving reports of seemingly impossible American defenses, initially dismissed the accounts as stress-induced hallucinations. Captain Minoru Genda, chief operations officer for Admiral Ozawa's carrier force, filed official reports insisting that proximity explosions were impossible given the known limitations of 1940s electronics. This intelligence failure only deepened the tactical catastrophe facing the Japanese forces. By November 1944, captured Japanese documents revealed widespread demoralization among kamikaze units. Pilots who had once volunteered eagerly for suicide missions now requested reassignment. The core principle of kamikaze tactics, accepting certain death to ensure mission success, collapsed when every mission became certain death with zero chance of success. American naval commanders recorded unprecedented changes in enemy behavior. Admiral Raymond Spruance noted in his November operations report that Japanese aircraft were avoiding engagement entirely rather than pressing attacks. This marked a complete reversal of Japanese tactical doctrine, which had always emphasized aggressive action regardless of the odds. The ripple effects extended throughout Japanese military planning. Imperial Navy headquarters, confronted with mounting pilot losses without corresponding American casualties, began questioning fundamental assumptions about defensive warfare. General Yoshijiro Umezu, Army Chief of Staff, received reports suggesting that American technology had reached levels beyond Japanese comprehension. Medical records from Japanese naval hospitals documented a surge in combat stress cases among surviving pilots. Unlike traditional trauma, these cases involved aviators reporting a sense of helplessness against weapons they could neither understand nor counter. Navy psychiatrists, unprepared for this psychological profile, struggled to treat pilots who described fighting ghosts and invisible barriers. The secrecy surrounding the technology only heightened its psychological impact. Japanese intelligence, unable to recover intact proximity fuses for study, devised increasingly desperate theories about American capabilities. Some reports even speculated about magnetic fields capable of detecting aircraft. Others suggested radar-guided bullets, all missing the mark by wide margins. American psychological warfare specialists quickly recognized the opportunity. Radio broadcasts to Japanese forces began hinting at invisible defensive barriers and automatic sky mines that made attacking American ships suicidal. These propaganda efforts, grounded in genuine technological superiority, proved devastatingly effective on Japanese morale. By December 1944, the broader strategic impact became clear. Japanese naval aviation, the branch that had executed Pearl Harbor and dominated Pacific skies in 1942, had effectively ceased offensive operations against American naval forces. The weapon that killed through proximity had created a psychological barrier the Japanese could not overcome. The influence of proximity fuses extended far beyond the end of the Pacific War. Military analysts from multiple nations studied the weapon's decisive role in neutralizing kamikaze tactics, recognizing that electronics had fundamentally changed the mathematics of aerial combat. The weapon demonstrated that technological superiority could outweigh numerical strength and tactical innovation when the disparity was extreme. Post-war testimonies from Japanese military leaders confirmed its strategic significance. Admiral Sumu Toyota, former commander and chief of the Combined Fleet, acknowledged during Allied interrogations that proximity fuses had rendered their aviation tactics obsolete overnight. General Curtis LeMay noted that the technology saved thousands of American lives by ending kamikaze effectiveness without requiring an invasion of Japan. The industrial ramifications were equally profound. American production of proximity fuses reached 22 million units by the end of the war, showcasing manufacturing capabilities that Japanese industry could never match. Each fuse represented the seamless integration of university research, private industry innovation, and military requirements, a level of coordination that became a model for post-war defense development. Dr. Vannevar Bush, director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, wrote in his 1945 final report, "The proximity fuse exemplified how scientific research could be rapidly translated into decisive military advantage. The weapon proved that complex electronics could be mass-produced and deployed effectively under combat conditions. The technology shaped military doctrine for decades. NATO forces during the Cold War developed surface-to-air missiles with proximity fuses based on principles first established in 1944. Modern air defense systems still use proximity detection, now with digital processors instead of vacuum tubes, but the core concept, creating lethal kill zones around projectiles, remains central to anti-aircraft warfare. Educational institutions preserve extensive records of proximity fuse development and deployment. The Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History exhibits original fuses alongside testimony from both American developers and Japanese survivors, demonstrating how technological innovation could resolve tactical stalemates that conventional weapons could not. Contemporary military historians regard proximity fuses as a turning point in the evolution of warfare. Professor John Lewis Gaddis of Yale University notes that the weapon proved how industrial capacity, combined with scientific innovation, could surpass traditional military virtues such as courage and tactical skill. The ethical implications of proximity fuses continue to spark debate among military philosophers. The weapon's effectiveness, reducing American casualties while devastating Japanese forces, highlights the moral complexity of technological warfare. Some argue that superior technology shortened conflicts and saved lives, while others question whether technological dominance creates fundamentally unfair advantages in combat. Modern precision munitions trace a direct lineage to proximity fuse innovations. GPS-guided shells, radar-seeking missiles, and automated defensive systems all rely on proximity detection principles first pioneered during World War II. The miniaturization techniques developed for vacuum tube electronics laid the groundwork for transistor technology and ultimately the development of microprocessors. Today, the Battle of Leyte Gulf stands as enduring testimony to the power of proximity fuses. The engagement where Japanese kamikaze tactics collided with American proximity-fused ammunition marked the effective end of Japan's naval aviation threat. In October 1944, liquid fire had cleared caves on Iwo Jima. By December 1944, invisible electronics had cleared the skies over the Pacific. The lesson remains relevant. In modern warfare, victory belongs not necessarily to those with the greatest numbers or bravest tactics, but to those who harness superior technology with precision and foresight.